Welcome to the Neurokrish Immersion. In this episode, we're going to talk about the Scarlet E, why epilepsy is still a burden, seizures to uncover the truth about epilepsy. We are talking about epilepsy not just as a textbook version, but as a lived experience, kind that stings quietly, that isolates, that's feared, not for what it is, but for how little it is understood. This is not just a condition, it's a label, a scarlet letter, an identity thrust upon millions. Let's unmask it in this podcast. We live in an age where we shout about everything, but when it comes to epilepsy, we whisper. Why? Perhaps because we fear that we don't fully understand. Epilepsy today affects over 23 million people in Asia alone. That's not rare. That's not remote. That's right here. And yet, stigma shouts louder than science. But what if we turned up the volume on the truth instead? Epilepsy is the most common serious neurological disease. Have you ever kept silent about something that deserved to be heard? 70% of epilepsy is treatable, but we are not talking about it. 7 out of 10 people with epilepsy can live seizure-free with the right treatment. That's not just hope, that's evidence. But what's getting in the way? Not just medicine, not just access, but the weight of misinformation, fear, and invisibility. It's time we shift the question from can it be treated to why haven't we treated it yet? Epilepsy can be treated with medication, what we call anti-epileptic drugs. It can be treated by surgery. There are specific surgical procedures that help a person with epilepsy. It can be treated by brain stimulation procedures. One of these that we use extensively is transcutaneous auricular vagus nerve stimulation. And of course, implanted vagus nerve stimulators have been around for years. And epilepsy does benefit from psychosocial interventions like counseling and yoga. But there is a gap between cure and care. And here we think about the 5 A's of healthcare access. There's availability of treatment. There is accessibility to treatment. Even if it's available, it may not be accessible for a range of circumstances. Then, in a place where most treatment is out of pocket, there is the problem of affordability. There is the need for treatment to be acceptable, and there's a need for the treatment paradigm to be accountable to the person receiving treatment. These are the 5 A's. It's not just about pills, it's about the path to reach them. Healing begins when systems don't fail the very people they are built on. Cross et al. In 2000 published a study which talked about the iceberg of ignorance about epilepsy, and Morrill and Pedley wrote a very interesting editorial in Neurology, the journal Neurology, to accompany this publication, The Scarlet E, Epilepsy is Still a Burden. Please do look at the visual guide to the podcast to see what the study showed in a synopsis. But what it showed was when they looked at publications, there was a huge misunderstanding bias. 210 media stories, when analyzed, showed distorted portrayals of epilepsy, wrong information in 14%, unrealistic expectations about new treatments in 9%, exaggeration of the seizure risks in 5%, and inaccuracies in general in about a third of all articles. Movies show possession. News shows fear. But real life is nuanced, emotional, manageable, misunderstood. It's time to flip the script from scary scenes to human stories. A 2024 Reddit thread entitled "My First Seizure in Public" had over 8,000 upvotes, and the top comment wasn't support but suspicion. That's the iceberg in action. Stigma is a big part of epilepsy. And when we looked at a very large number of global studies, what they showed was negative and social perceptions. People with epilepsy face rejection, discrimination, and pity, especially in schools, workplaces, and even within families. Internalized shame and self-blame. Many begin to believe they are at fault for their condition, leading to low self-esteem and guilt. Impact on everyday functioning. The stigma limits independence. People become reliant on family and caregivers, not by choice, but by societal force. Concealment as a coping mechanism. To avoid judgment, many choose to hide their diagnosis. They stop disclosing their condition at work, school, or even in relationships. The need for informed support. When people around them understand epilepsy, it makes all the difference, but that support is fragile, reliant on awareness, empathy, and consistent care. In a 2023 podcast on Spotify titled Seizing Control, guests described pretending to have low blood sugar instead of admitting to epilepsy. That's the power that stigma still holds. Let's talk about a little human story that we encountered in our work. Meet Mr. S, a statistician who lived a life governed by numbers until his own body became the wild card. 10 seizures a month, 10 moments a month of fear and loss of control and public shame. He stopped working, friends drifted, anxieties grew. This wasn't just epilepsy, it was erasure. Mr. S is not a rare example. He is a reflection of what happens when society fails to accommodate the unpredictable, when instead of building bridges, we build distance. He had periodic seizures without warning, debilitating, causing great amount of anxiety. He was underemployed. He had a low salary, poor job security. He had problems with his family. His wife was less educated than him, but better employed. She was resentful that the epilepsy had been concealed from her before their arranged marriage. They had a poor relationship, and by the time we met him, he was living separately from her and his children. He had no friends or peer relationships. He was living with his elderly parents, and he was largely supported by his brother, who was well placed and had a job abroad. What happened with him is very revealing. With a tailored and rational drug treatment regimen and counseling, he saw incredible medical progress. Within 6 months, his seizures reduced dramatically to just 2 per month, and these were partial rather than generalized seizures, which meant that he didn't fall or lose consciousness or hit his head. He began working in a hospital project of ours as an office assistant. He overcame social anxiety, built relationships in the workplace, and improved his emotional well-being. But even as his medical condition improved, his family life remained fractured. He continued to live with his aged parents. He continued to be separated from his wife and children. As his story reminds us that recovery is not just about seizure control. The psychosocial, emotional, and relational domains must also be addressed, and true healing is multi-dimensional. Here, the International Classification of Functioning framework of the WHO is very, very helpful. It makes you ask the question, how are you functioning in life? Not just medically, but socially, emotionally, and environmentally. The ICF model looks at 4 parts. It looks at body functions and structure, what's physically affected. It looks at activity. Can you carry out your daily tasks? It looks at participation. Are you able to play your roles in family, work, and society? It looks at contextual factors. Are your surroundings helping or hindering you? This isn't just about labels. It's about seeing a person in context, compassionately and completely. Instead of asking, how sick are you? Imagine a world where we ask, how are you living? And that really is the shift that we need when we deal with chronic diseases like epilepsy. Germany has taken the lead in classifying disability in conditions like epilepsy by taking a very bold stance. It recognizes epilepsy as a disability, not just when seizures are severe, but even when they are mild or infrequent. Why? Because epilepsy isn't just about how many seizures you have, it's about how they affect your life. In Germany, mild or rare seizures are classified as having 50 to 60% disability, frequent mild seizures as 60 to 80%, and frequent severe seizures at 90 to 100%. And here's the critical part. Even if a person stops having seizures but continues medication, they are still legally considered disabled. Under German law, a person is considered healed only if they've been seizure-free for 3 years without medication. This is not just a smart law. It's humane recognition of how chronic and life-altering epilepsy really is. What if we started measuring disability not by what we see, but by what someone lives through every day? What the German support model makes us realize is that there are many things that we need to achieve in a robust model. Job protection. Employers need special permission to terminate employment when it comes to people who have conditions like epilepsy. Tax benefits, lower income tax rates and other financial breaks. Extra leave, more vacation days to manage health and recovery. Educational support, facilities and allowances for students with epilepsy. There are a number of instances where people are asked to leave schools or other institutions because the school or the institution is scared of the epilepsy that the person is having. Fair employment opportunities. Large companies are required to employ a quota of disabled individuals. Anti-discrimination rights, legal protection in education, healthcare, and employment sectors. What happens after diagnosis? In Germany, the answer is protection, dignity, and support. What about where you live? Is your ecosystem supporting you? Beyond seizure control, therefore, is the whole system of role functioning. Role functioning includes educational and occupational functioning, family and marital functioning, physical health and nutrition, managing medical comorbidities that a person may have, and psychological functioning. Global bodies like WHO and ILE are changing that lens. They urge us to look beyond seizure counts to something more meaningful, not just look at seizures and seizure control. This means asking the question, can the person go to school or college? Can they hold a job? Can they be a spouse or parent? Can they care for someone else? Can they contribute to their community? It's not just about surviving epilepsy, it's about living fully and independently despite it. This shift in thinking helps us move from checklists to real life. It makes epilepsy care more human, more relevant, and more complete. Seizure-free doesn't always mean life-ready. What good is control if someone still can't live the life they want? And this is brought to us most in clinical situations like when someone has had surgery for epilepsy. So here's a person with intractable seizures year and year and year after having seizures who has surgery, the seizures stop. And we often find the person is ill-prepared for life that follows. Society and families expect them to just roll over and start functioning like everybody else now that the seizures are not there. Unfortunately, the person is not ready for life. Living with epilepsy, therefore, requires a fair amount of support and education. So what can we do in terms of real-life interventions to empower people with epilepsy? We can have special classrooms in mainstream schools. Educational support helps prevent dropout, builds confidence, and fosters inclusion from an early age. We can have skilling opportunities, vocational training, and employment programs that provide people with a livelihood and self-worth. We can look at social activity and peer interaction, safe spaces to build relationships, reduce isolation, and nurture self-confidence. We can foster transparency and openness, encouraging people to talk about epilepsy and their own journeys without fear of judgment. We can tap into government schemes. Many welfare schemes exist, but awareness and access remains low, and we in healthcare must bridge that gap. What if we stopped waiting for society to be ready and just started building the supports that should have been there all along? Epilepsy is a condition that often begins from the medial temporal lobe. And the medial temporal lobe, as you've heard in one podcast after the other that we're doing, isn't just about memory. It's your emotional thermostat and a key player in how your body responds to stress. In temporal lobe epilepsy, therefore, which is about 70% of all epilepsy, people with seizures experience sudden anxiety or mood swings, memory lapses, physical symptoms like rapid heartbeats or gut discomfort, what we call autonomic outflow. And because this brain zone controls both emotion and autonomic nervous system, what seems psychological may be deeply biological. Many patients with temporal lobe epilepsy report feeling déjà vu or intense emotional déjà vu, a sense of already lived just before a seizure. And this is part and parcel of the epilepsy they encounter. However, the dissonance need not just be neurological. It can also be emotional. People with epilepsy often face a tug of war between what they feel inside and what society expects of them. For example, a young adult with epilepsy may crave independence and intimacy, but is constantly told to play it safe, stay quiet, stay hidden. That conflict, that dissonance doesn't disappear. It gets stored, and when there's no safe way to express it, the brain converts it into physical symptoms. This way in which our brains and mind work is called repression. It's the mind's way of protecting itself by pushing down what's too much to feel. But it doesn't vanish. It often comes back as non-epileptic events, anxiety, or chronic body symptoms, which then just serve to muddy the water. Sigmund Freud was one of the first to describe how unconscious emotion could shape physical symptoms over a century ago. Today, neuroscience is catching up. And if you're watching the visual guide to the podcast, you'll see this interesting cartoon about how biological and psychological address the Freudian concept. The other concept that we need to understand from psychological perspective is learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is when you stop trying because nothing seems to change, no matter what you do. It was perhaps first seen in World War II factory workers who were stuck in repetitive jobs. Over time, they gave up trying to influence their situation. The same pattern often shows up in people with epilepsy. Imagine being told to avoid risks, stay home, be careful, again and again, or not knowing when your next seizure might strike. Slowly, you begin to feel like the control over your life is slipping away. And what follows is not laziness or apathy. It's a defense, your mind adapting to uncertainty and overprotection. And left unchecked, it can crush motivation and stall recovery. Empowerment-based care, where patients are given choices, can reverse this helplessness and improve therapy engagement. There's a very interesting psychological concept, locus of control, which you can apply to epilepsy. There are two different mindsets. You can either have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. People with an external locus of control believe that life controls them. More stress and helplessness and greater vulnerability to anxiety and depression follow. People with an internal locus of control believe that they influence their own outcomes. They tend to have greater emotional resilience and cope better with their epilepsy. Studies show that internal locus of control in chronic illness is linked to better treatment adherence and emotional well-being. Ask yourself, what kind of locus of control do you operate with? Is it external or internal? Epilepsy, therefore, is an invisible disability, and many chronic diseases like epilepsy are. When we talk about epilepsy, seizures dominate the conversation. But what about the things we can't see? Depression, anxiety, emotional breakdown, so even suicidal thoughts. These are all part of what we call the invisible disability of epilepsy. They don't show up on scans or discharge summaries, but they shape people's lives every day. This invisible load affects confidence, relationships, and hope. And that's why empathy matters so much. Everyone has a role, not just to treat, but to truly understand. And support may not just be about fixing the problem, it's about showing up consistently and compassionately. The World Health Organization recognizes mental health symptoms as a core component of epilepsy disability and not just as side effects. If you're looking at the visual guide, you'll see important references to the psychosocial aspects of epilepsy that we are talking about, including recent papers, the one by Mulla and Sander being a wonderful review. Epilepsy just doesn't affect the brain. It ripples out into families, communities, and society. The emotional and social toll is often greater than the physical symptoms. People with epilepsy face more than seizures. They are faced with stigma, isolation, and misunderstanding. The healthcare system, as it stands, tends to focus on medication and tests. But what about the loneliness, the shame, the job lost because of one public episode? And this is why the psychosocial aspect of epilepsy deserves greater attention. Real care means going beyond medication to social acceptance, support systems, and public education. Here's an insight. Community-based education programs have been shown to reduce epilepsy-related stigma and improve treatment outcomes in low-resource settings. We practice a best practice model, which we published many years ago in the paper by Krishnamurthy and Gilliam. Again, the visual guide gives you the reference. And we talked about how, with the neurologist or the neuropsychiatrist as the team leader and decision maker, a team of other specialists including neuropsychologists and psychologists, social workers, counselors, physical and occupational therapists, working both in hospital and at home, can actually make a difference to the person with epilepsy. We also published here the typical workflow of how we triage such patients and how we work with people in both medical and psychosocial ways. Think about this. What if the doctor's prescription for epilepsy included therapy, support groups, and family counseling alongside medication? That is the power of integrative care. Multidisciplinary and multi-component care is therefore extremely important. Why? Because treatment for epilepsy, while advancing rapidly, is still taking time. There is a group of people for whom treatment does not necessarily work. Science tends to move slowly, and even when discoveries happen, it takes years for them to reach clinics, especially in the developing world. And we talked about the 5A gap. Many people with treatment-resistant epilepsy never make it past the evaluation. Some aren't referred, others can't afford surgery, and many just fall through the cracks. Multidisciplinary, multi-component care can actually take care of all people with epilepsy, ensuring that they just don't start the journey, they finish it. Integration of care is therefore extremely important. Integration is not just a buzzword, it's a bridge to better healing. Respecting personal beliefs around healing and recovery is important. Integration helps. Focusing not just on seizure control but on reducing suffering and improving daily life is important. Integration helps. Involving families and caregiving, which boosts emotional support and satisfaction, is important. Integration helps. Instead of fragmented care, integration weaves together medical, psychological, and social threads to hold the person, not just the condition. Here's an insight. Integrative models are proven to reduce hospitalizations and improve patient satisfaction, especially in chronic neurological disorders like epilepsy. We've practiced integration in Buddhi Clinic now for about 15 years, and I can tell you that it's tremendously helpful in terms of taking the broad bio-psycho-social view. Again, if you're watching the visual guide, you'll get to see the cartoon which talks about the different factors that we need to work on as part of an integrative program. We have a number of options. We have drugs, both anti-epileptic and psychotropic. We have epilepsy surgery. We have the range of invasive and non-invasive brain stimulation methods, and this is a growing space. And to this we must graft physical and psychosocial rehabilitation. For those who are impaired, therapy for speech and language, occupational skills and social skills, and care that brings about holistic well-being, nutrition, sleep, exercise, for which yoga, mindfulness, and traditional systems are all important. WHO's model of community-based rehab echoes this grafting model. Holistic layers of care improve not just long outcomes, but long-term quality of life. Good healthcare systems also include locally available and culturally acceptable interventions. Yoga, for example, is India's gift to the world. Yoga has great potential to help a person adapt better to their circumstances. Good systems blend modern science, therefore, with ancient healthcare traditions. There is wisdom in our ancient traditions which can be incorporated into care. Good systems improve activities of daily living, improves health-related quality of life. Good systems measure and track healthcare outcomes in a broader way beyond just seizure numbers. And good systems also offer inbuilt client choice. Being able to choose what you'd like to do is so important when you're struggling with a chronic disease like epilepsy. As part of a good system, I'd like to introduce you to an exciting tool, transcutaneous auricular vagus nerve stimulation, which is non-invasive neuromodulation for epilepsy. Not every tool in epilepsy care needs to be invasive or complicated. One of the most promising additions to our toolbox is TAVNS. Unlike a surgically implanted vagus nerve stimulator, TAVNS is non-invasive and portable. It's low risk and cost effective. It's easy to use at home or in outpatient settings. It works by stimulating the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, which connects directly with areas of the brain that regulate emotion, memory, and autonomic functions like digestion and heart rate. This isn't just about neurology, it's where brain science meets holistic healing. We use the TAVNS extensively for epilepsy care as part of an integrative health program, and I can tell you the results have been excellent. The TAVNS gives you the promise of healing being handheld. It's not something that you should do outside a clinic. It needs medical supervision, but it has great promise. So how do you help a person with epilepsy self-actualize? Let's borrow from Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a moment. What does it take for anyone to thrive? From basic safety to a sense of belonging and eventually self-actualization. For people with epilepsy, every step up that pyramid that you see in the visual guide is harder. Medication may control seizures, but what about their confidence, their careers, their relationships? Holistic, person-centered care helps people rise beyond symptoms, beyond stigma, towards their highest potential, because self-actualization isn't a luxury, it's a right. Ask yourself, can someone with epilepsy become their fullest self? The answer is only if we build the path beyond treatment. And here lies the pathway to self-actualization. As we close, living with epilepsy isn't just about managing a condition. It's often about discovering a deeper self. Many of us who walk this path find new dimensions of creativity, insight, and connection. Could epilepsy be a gateway, not just a diagnosis? Think about the example of Vincent van Gogh, whom we've talked about in the Inspired Brain podcast. His epilepsy was a gateway to his creativity. He became a world-famous painter, sadly not in his lifetime. If you or someone you love lives with epilepsy, remember, every experience holds meaning. Today, take a moment to reflect, not just on what went wrong, but what we might be awakening within. Did you pause today to notice what your mind is trying to tell you? Beyond the seizures, the scans, the schedules, living with epilepsy invites us to tune in, not just zone out. Did you listen today? Thank you.